My name is Susan Glimsher. I'm with the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, and I am delighted to see so many of you joining us today. I want to thank you for joining us for the first webinar in our 2022 series, Preserve the Past, Build for the Future. We have a great lineup this year of webinars. On February 23rd at 5:00 p.m., and all of these are Eastern Time, we will talk about interpreting enslaved people's history at historic sites. On March 23rd at 2:00 p.m., we'll discuss preserving African American burial sites. And on April 27th at 5 p.m., please join us to talk about natural disasters and their threat to historic preservation and historic sites. You can register for one or all of these webinars in our chat box, where Lynn is very kindly going to put up the link to registration. And she will also very kindly put up a flyer that talks a little bit about each webinar so you can understand what you're signing up for. I think you're going to really enjoy hearing from our guests this evening when we talk about finding a career in historic preservation and related fields. First, we'll hear from Porsha, Dossie, and Raina, Regan. Porsha is a staff historian with the Park History Program at the National Park Service. And Raina is a program analyst and the National Park Service Liaison for the Grants Program at the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. These young professionals will talk about their career journeys and where they ended up as of right now, great positions, and will give you tips on how you too can find out more about entering these fields. Next, we'll hear from Melissa Wyllie, the CEO and president of the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation. She'll tell you about careers in historic preservation at nonprofit organizations. We'll then talk to Beth Savage, the General Services Administration, or GSA, Federal Preservation Officers. She will talk to us about jobs in historic preservation at the federal government. Finally, ACHP Program Analyst and GSA Liaison, Lavernia, will tell us about jobs that can be found working in state historic preservation offices. Before we begin, everyone is now muted and their cameras are off. At the end of the program, we will have a question and answer session. At that time, you will be able to ask questions of the panelists. So if you have a thought, a question, or a suggestion, please go ahead and put it in the chat section of this Zoom call, and we will call on you when it's your turn to ask your question directly of the panelists. If you would prefer not to be on video at that time, just talk to us on the microphone. Please note, this webinar is being recorded and we may use it again in the future. So again, if you don't want to have your picture on the recording when you're asking questions, just use your microphone. Now I would like to welcome Porsha Dossie. Porsha, you're ready? Perfect, but you're muted. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Susan. So my name is Porsha Dossie. I am currently the program historian for the African American Civil Rights Network, which is a commemorative program in the National Park Service based in Washington, D.C. at our headquarters office. It's a really great opportunity. I wanted to talk about my experience and how I got here, because I think so many folks have an interest in historic preservation that look like me and come from underrepresented communities, but don't know how many opportunities are really out there to get that technical experience through internships and fellowships. So I guess I'll talk a little bit about my journey. I'm a graduate from the University of Central Florida. I did my undergrad and graduate work there, graduating in 2018. And during my time in grad school, I knew pretty quickly that I wasn't super interested in becoming a academic professor, I really was interested in museums and historic preservation. And so in 2016, I applied for a fellowship at the Smithsonian. And that fellowship is the Minority Awards Program. So I want to take some time and talk about that because it is a paid fellowship. They offer a $6,000 stipend over the course of 10 weeks during the summer. They also provide a relocation stipend of, I think, between $250 to $500, depending on where you're coming from. And during that experience, I got to work on the inaugural exhibits for the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And that was just such an incredible experience. And I got internship credit as well as paid to do that kind of work. And so you don't often see a lot of paid opportunities in this kind of field, unfortunately. So I really wanted to highlight that because as far as I know, they're still doing that fellowship, as well as some other programs that I'm happy to share later over email or in the chat when I have time. So I did that, and through that experience, I also partnered with the National Park Service. So we had a partnership known as the Slave Recs Project. And so I think when folks think of the National Park Service, they think of our natural resources and they think of the big parks out west, but there's a lot of cultural resources work that happens at the National Park Service. And that's what I learned during my time at the Smithsonian. And so I kind of thought to myself, like, oh, I really enjoyed my fellowship here. I see that the Park Service offers fellowships. Maybe I should apply for that. And so a year later, I learned about the National Council for Preservation Education, which is a internship program that connects students, primarily graduate students, with opportunities with the National Park Service to do preservation work, as well as cultural resources work. And so I applied for that, and that is actually what brought me to Washington, D.C. And so for that program, they offer up to 1,200 hours of internship opportunities, completely paid. They do offer relocation depending on your situation. And so in January 2018, I started as a NICP intern with the Park History Program Office, which I'm currently a part of, working on teaching with historic places lesson plans. So developing a lesson plan on African Americans in the War of 1812. And that eventually led to some other opportunities with the Park Service, particularly a fellowship through the American Conservation Experience, which brings me to my next point. There are things known as special hiring authorities that allow you to be more competitive for government employment, particularly for those of you interested in working in the federal government. This is the program for you. And so I applied for that, and through that completed a 640-hour virtual project that allowed me to gain a special hiring authority that led to my current position with the National Park Service. And I'm happy to talk about that more in the Q&A portion if folks are interested. But that's kind of my journey. I did that fellowship for 2 years. I spearheaded the communications outreach for the African American Civil Rights Network. I helped develop the program, worked on the creating the application, as well as the logo and some of our other promotional materials. And that's what I did for those 2 years. And eventually a GS9 historian position opened up with that same office. I applied, the position was offered to me, and I've been here ever since. And I think most of the time when I do things like this, I'm kind of wanting to encourage other folks with similar backgrounds to apply for these kinds of things and find these opportunities, because it can be really lonely when you're the only person that looks like you in the room. And I think that so much of historic preservation leaves out folks of color and other underrepresented groups. And I think the more that we have folks that look like America, the better we are when it comes to historic preservation. So yeah, I think I probably rambled enough. But if anybody has any questions, I look forward to the Q&A. So thank you.
Porsha, that was great. And you mentioned so many wonderful names as resources. I wonder if you would just put a couple of those names in the chat. So if our participants would like to ask you specifically about something wonderful you were talking about, but they didn't get to hear enough, we can come back to you.
Awesome.
And thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Now I would like to introduce Raina Regan, who will tell you a little bit about her job journey. Raina?
Thank you, Susan. And it was great to hear about Porsha's career journey. Hello, everyone. My name is Raina Regan, and I am a recent addition to the ACHP staff. I've been here a little less than 3 months, but I'm no stranger to the Advisory Council, which I want to share a little bit about today. When I was an undergraduate student, I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my career. I really struggled to identify something that really resonated with me. I changed my major a couple of times, and I was starting to do some research about jobs available, and I just by happenstance came across some positions in historic preservation. And when I started to do a little bit more, analysis, I discovered it really combined a lot of the things I was interested in: history, policy and politics, design and architecture. And it felt like really was the complete package for me. And upon some further analysis and research, I found out that going to graduate school seemed to be a common path that many people took to obtain a career in the field. And so ultimately, I chose to go to Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana for my master's degree. And I chose that partially because I'm a Midwesterner and I was looking at programs in the Midwest, but also I really connected with the faculty and staff and students there, and they offered me some financial assistance, which was really important to me. At the time, the program was a 2-year program requiring an internship over the summer. And in my first semester, I started exploring internship opportunities and really wanted to work in DC. I really visioned having a career kind of at the intersection of the federal government and preservation. And through some connections I made at the National Preservation Conference, I was connected with the staff of the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, where I ended up being an intern in the Office of Preservation Initiatives in the summer of 2009. And that internship was really, I give it a lot of credit for my career and where I am today, because it made some really valuable connections for me professionally, but also personally, because I really enjoy getting to know all the staff at the Advisory Council. They provided me a lot of opportunities to contribute meaningfully to the agency's work. And I really knew that one day I hope to return the Advisory Council. Since when I graduated from graduate school, it was at the height of the 2008-2010 recession. And I know for a fact, having that Advisory Council experience in my internship on my resume, helped me stand out to the hiring manager. And she asked about it in my interview, and she later told me it was a key reason that she hired me for the role. So I know that I'm sure one of my colleagues is, oh, yep, Lynn has put it in the chat, and that the Advisory Council is currently accepting internships for this coming summer. I believe that they're virtual, so they're really a great opportunity to network with some great, fantastic colleagues. My professional career journey, how I eventually came back to the Advisory Council, I've held a variety of positions. My first job was a contract role. It was a 1-year temporary position working as an architectural historian for a state agency that also had federal funding involved, and I got exposed to the Section 106 process and working in the field that way. And I've worked in roles in state and national nonprofit organizations prior to coming to the Advisory Council in the fall. And one of the pieces of advice I give to people pursuing careers in historic preservation is there's a really a breadth of opportunities to work in a variety of sectors, and you don't have to just pick one. You don't have to just pick working for a nonprofit or just pursue the government route. A lot of the skills are transferable to be successful as a preservation professional. So happy to share more about that. But when I saw this opportunity come up at the Advisory Council over the summer and applied, I was really delighted to return to the agency and see some friendly faces, but also get to know new colleagues who weren't there when I was an intern, and it has been really great. So that's a little bit about my career journey, and happy to share more during the Q&A as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Raina. I still remember the first time you came to work with us. You were impressive even then. So ladies, both of you, thank you so much. You give me great hope for the future. So now I would like to turn to Melissa Wyllie, and she will tell us a little bit about her work at the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation.
Hi, thank you, Susan. So my name is Melissa Wyllie. As she mentioned, I'm the CEO and president of the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation. We are Florida's statewide nonprofit committed to protecting Florida's special historic places. And we are located in Tallahassee, Florida, which is the capital of Florida, just as a reminder for everybody. And we do represent the full state. So we have board members and programs and services and events statewide. So I'm excited about the opportunity to speak with you all tonight and talk a little bit about nonprofit careers. And since that's what we're going to be talking about, I feel like I'm kind of trying to get everyone excited about nonprofit careers for historic preservation. I hope we can do that. But I thought it'd be helpful to start out with a couple quick facts and things to think about nonprofit careers in historic preservation. So to start, I just wanted to remind everyone, I know that sometimes when we think of nonprofit jobs and career choices, we think maybe of smaller organizations and maybe we don't have a full picture for what that sector looks like. So according to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there were more than 12 million jobs in the nonprofit sector in 2016, which was about 10%, actually a little more than 10% of the total of US private sector employment. So that's a big chunk of people. And then in 2017, the Johns Hopkins Center for Civil Society Studies took it a step further and found that US nonprofits were actually the third largest employer of the US economy. So we're actually talking about a pretty big chunk of careers here and a pretty pivotal player in our economy and a sector in our economy. And then finally, just something to think about, because of that, the importance that this sector plays in our overall economy. Nonprofits have experienced kind of an increasing, let's say, level of expectations and transparency for their operations. So there's a really level of professionalism that we see very frequently in the nonprofit sector that I think is really interesting and exciting, but we are challenged because of our funding models to operate more efficiently and actually borrow many of the management tactics that for-profit businesses utilize, like strategic planning and a growing focus on marketing. So all of these skill sets are potential careers that one could have in the nonprofit sector. So when I talk about nonprofits, I kind of say that they exist because there is a gap between what is offered by the government and what is offered by the private sector. And we kind of exist to bridge that gap. And so for historic preservation, I think that's a really exciting place. And it's a very exciting field for me to work in. And not only am I working in that interesting sector, but our organization, the Florida Trust, has a really great mission that I'm thrilled to be a part of. And we exist to promote the inclusive sharing of the diverse architectural, historical, and archaeological heritage of Florida. So with a mission sort of that big, as you can imagine, we work with a lot of different professionals, from archaeologists to architects to folks who work in coalition building and communications and marketing. So we need all of these people to sort of make the preservation movement work and be effective here in Florida. So just a couple things about the Florida Trust. We are a 501c3 charitable nonprofit. So we exist through donations and funding from our members. We do not receive government funding. We are a statewide organization, and we were founded in 1978 in response actually to the almost demolition. I've got several of my co-speakers here are also from Florida, but we almost lost the historic Florida Capitol in 1978. So that really sort of lit a fire under the preservation movement here in Florida. And as a result, the Florida Trust was born. So we are a 43-year-old organization here in Florida. So I guess just sort of to conclude all those thoughts about working for nonprofits in the historic preservation sector, I would just kind of encourage everyone to think about volunteering as a way to learn more about historic preservation nonprofits. For us, the folks that we work with professionally do a great job, but as a nonprofit, we really rely on our volunteers and particularly our board of directors, which is a volunteer position for nonprofits. We could not achieve our mission without them, and their skill sets range from everything, like we mentioned before, architecture, archaeology, attorneys, accountants, marketing professionals, legal analysts, legislative consultants. We need all of these different players to make our mission happen. And so what I like to say about nonprofits is, even if your career takes you in a different path, you can always volunteer at a nonprofit. We are here for you all, and we need all of you, I think, here at the Florida Trust and in any community, and nationally, we need everyone to really make this movement happen and make sense. So I'm happy to answer any specific questions that we might have at the end about nonprofit jobs, and I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And now we'll hear from Beth Savage, the Federal Preservation Officer for the General Services Administration. Beth, are you there? I know we were having some computer problems.
Good evening. Yes, I am here. I don't know whether my images made it to Lynn or whether they are available. I can proceed either way. Lynn?
Lynn, any luck with Beth's
Okay, well,
slides? Okay.
Sorry, I'm getting them up.
Okay, as you get them up, I will begin talking. No problem. Thank you. And I apologize. I am having major technical issues. Didn't have them until right before we came on to this call, which is always the way. I have the honor of directing the U.S. General Services Center for Historic Buildings. And in that capacity, I serve as GSA's Federal Preservation Officer. The Federal Preservation Officer role, as the SHPO role that you'll hear more about from the next speaker, Laura, and Tribal Historic Preservation Officers are all defined roles under the National Historic Preservation Act. Interestingly, along my career journey, I came to the GSA from the National Park Service. So there's a lot of intersectionality with what has already been stated by the other speakers. And I started at the National Park Service as a graduate school intern. I came to GSA's Regional Historic Preservation Officer and Regional Fine Arts Officer in the National Capital Region before I came to the headquarters as the Federal Preservation Officer. I just wanted to give you a little bit of context, because historians love to say that context is everything. The U.S. General Services Administration is an executive branch that was established in 1949. It has two major components: the Public Building Service for buildings and the Federal Acquisition Service, which is products and services, or stuff. It runs the federal fleet of cars and procures IT services and other products. I work for the Public Building Service. Next slide, please. Just to let you understand a little bit about the historic building inventory that I oversee, we have over 1,800 owned buildings that represent the federal presence in communities across the country. 514 currently of these are historic buildings, which constitutes approximately 30% of this inventory. The inventory is the largest commercial office portfolio in the world. Next, please. And these are the kinds of buildings that GSA has in its historic inventory. The judiciary, federal district courthouses, they are our largest client tenant agency. We have custom houses, federal buildings, border stations, and workplaces for more than 1 million federal workers. Next, please. And these are the public building service responsibilities under the National Historic Preservation Act. These constitute what our stewardship program entails. We manage owned buildings. We reinvest responsibly in our historic buildings. We advocate for the 30% of the historic buildings that are owned. And we also then dispose of unneeded buildings, and we ensure that if they are historic buildings, that they are preserved either through preservation covenants that are held, or easements that are held by preservation organizations such as state historic preservation offices or statewide nonprofits such as Miss Wyllie's. We ensure that new construction is compatible. GSA's moniker is, we are known as the civilian federal government's realtor. So we design, build, and steward the buildings that house those million workers. We also encourage the leasing of historic buildings that are owned by the private sector. Next, please. This is not for you to memorize. There will not be a quiz on this. This is the Center for Historic Buildings in a snapshot. I have currently eight folks who work for me, and you can see by some of the keywords that are affiliated with each of them where their professional subject matter expertise lies. It is not comprehensive, but you can see that it covers a vast range of topics, from materials conservation science to archaeology to policy to disposal to building performance, to NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, and National Historic Preservation Act integration, historic building documentation, building evaluation research, and the National Register program. We have one of the most active National Register programs of any federal agency. Section 106 compliance that you've heard described, advocacy, preservation design. Preservation is design. And we also liaise with different programs within the GSA, such as facilities management, portfolio management, disposal, and leasing. Next, please. This next slide is not for you to read. This is not going to be an eye test. This is just to illustrate, once again, in a snapshot, the other professional expertise that constitutes our national preservation cohort. The Center for Historic Buildings has 9 members, myself and my 8 staff. And then the subject matter experts who are illustrated here, of which we currently have 28, are in each of our 11 regions that cover the country, and they carry out all of the federally mandated responsibilities at the regional level. So I work with historic preservation specialists, architectural historians, historical architects, materials conservators, and historians. Our personnel significantly exceed the professional qualifications that are defined by the Secretary of the Interior. All of our preservation cohort possess master's degrees and have currently between 14 and 40 years of varied professional experience. I did not add that up cumulatively. It would be several hundred years of experience, which is a tremendous thing for a federal agency to have such a preservation infrastructure. I think the next one is my last one. Nope, it is not, but it is the next to last, and it is the last one of substance, and it's very important. You have heard, Porsha mentioned it first, about the National Council of Preservation Education, a program which is administered through the National Park Service. GSA and the National Park Service through NICP have had a very long-standing partnership. GSA has participated in the internship program for more than 25 years. We've had more than 40 interns. They have had diverse academic backgrounds, preservation planning, architecture, interior design, history, and they have gone on to subsequently have careers both within GSA, other federal agencies, state historic preservation offices, private CRM firms, which is cultural resource management firms, and local preservation organizations. I had the I have had the pleasure of working with interns through this program throughout my federal career. As a graduate student, when I got my internship at the National Park Service, that was to be a stopgap measure to help me afford my tuition as I was concluding my graduate degree and to gain some practical on-the-job experience. And several years later, where we come today, my federal career has been my entire career. It has been one that has been varied. It is one that has had many firsts and I have been exposed to many challenges and to many successes, all of which have been achieved in partnerships. Nothing ever happens in preservation without partnerships. And the multidisciplinary character of historic preservation, which the previous speaker just spoke of, is absolutely key. So there are many places for many folks who have many different types of expertise or goals or the ways in which you see yourself fitting into preservation. The activities that I have worked on have ranged from a lesson plan was mentioned. I used to oversee some of the publication of lesson plans at the Park Service. I worked with the travel itinerary program, particularly the one on civil rights. And I had the distinct honor of editing the African American Historic Places book, with which I worked with 3 different educational organizations and 3 different interns who helped produce that book. I'd be happy to answer any questions and look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, so much. Sorry for the hesitation, but I was trying to grab a picture of you. So now I would love to ask Lavernia to go ahead and come on screen and talk to us a little bit about state historic preservation offices.
Hi, my name is Laura Lavernia. I am a program analyst here at the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. And I originally came to the ACHP. I've been here for about a year and a few months now, but I originally came to the ACHP from the Virginia State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO office. You all may or may not, I don't know how familiar you all are with SHPO offices, some more than others, I'm sure, but every state has a SHPO office, including the territories, the US territories, and the District of Columbia. SHPO offices, as Beth mentioned, were founded by the National Historic Preservation Act, and they are funded by the Historic Preservation Fund and a 40% minimum match by the states in order to ensure that state and federal partnership. So there is a mandate for state historic preservation offices and what they're supposed to do on a regular basis. And that is in section 101B of the National Historic Preservation Act. But overall, what they do is they conduct comprehensive surveys of the historic properties in their state. They maintain an inventory of these historic properties. They administer state programs of federal assistance. They identify and nominate properties to the National Register. They advise federal, state, and local governments on matters having to do with historic preservation. They implement a statewide historic preservation plan. They work with local governments and help establish CLG programs or certified local governments. And they consult with federal agencies for undertakings that take place under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, which the ACHP promulgates and writes the implementing regulations for. Those are codified under 36 CFR 800, if you're curious. So there's also a role that SHPO offices play in state government too. They also promote and review, they conduct state reviews for both historic preservation and for archaeology, and they can hold easements. They also manage the state rehabilitation tax credits. They also maintain state grant programs, and some historic preservation offices, some SHPO offices, have Main Street programs within their SHPO office. They also provide consultation for undertakings subject to Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. When I worked at the SHPO office for over 4 years, I was a Section 106 reviewer. And my colleagues on the other side were state tax credit reviewers. And my colleagues on the other side were National Register historians and community specialists. So, and of course, also in Virginia downstairs, we had a robust conservation lab, and some of my colleagues were conservators and archivists. So I would say that overall, oh, and of course, Virginia, I would be hesitant to not mention that Virginia also has a robust easement program. So some of my colleagues were also easement administrators. And an easement is a voluntary legal agreement in the form of a deed, which permanently protects a historic property. So ranging from 106 reviewers, which can be both architectural historians and archaeologists, to state credit reviewers, to National Register program coordinators, to state program administrators, to state archaeologists, Main Street coordinators, easement and covenant administrators and reviewers, and to being an archivist and a conservator. There are a myriad of jobs that you can have at a state historic preservation office. Overall, I would say that to gain entry, it is a good idea to reach out to your HR, the HR people at any SHPO office and ask if they have internships. That's a great way to get your foot in the door, and many times they do. The other thing I would say is, for the most part, educational preparation for state historic preservation offices consists of meeting the Secretary of the Interior standards for professional qualifications. And overall, I guess what I've seen for the most part is architectural historians tend to either have a degree in architecture or they have a master's degree in historic preservation or architectural history. I would say for archaeologists, they have an advanced degree in archaeology. So I can add a link to the professional standards, and I look forward to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. We appreciate that. We do have some questions, and again, I would urge any of you to put questions or thoughts in the Q&A or the chat box. We'll be going back and forth between them. So I would like to start off with a question from Veronica Villani Inza. I'm sure I said that wrong. Veronica, would you like to unmute yourself and turn your video on and speak directly to the panelists?
Susan, it appears that Veronica is not on anymore, so can you ask her a question? I think it's an interesting one.
Okay, so Veronica asked if the panelists see a need in their careers for interior designers, and that is a good question. So if you'd like to answer it, please just unmute yourself and put yourself on video, and feel free to chime in.
Hi there, it's Melissa. So I could just say briefly from our perspective that I think that absolutely interior design is a practice and something that we would appreciate and utilize. I know that a lot of the architects that we work with actually have interior design elements to their team, and because that protection of the interior character defining features are so important. So I would say absolutely, yeah.
And I would just add that I included interior design as one of the types of folks that we worked with in our internship program. I work with interior designers every day in my job, so the answer to that would be wherever you're dealing with design, and remember that preservation is design. Within the design community, that is often not a message that is that well understood, but it is one of my maintenance is preservation and preservation is design. I have to say that multiple times per week to people I work with. So the answer is yes.
I'll have to remember that, Beth, so I can use it. Thank you so much. Does anybody want to speak to that?
Well, and I would just add my minor, one of my 2 minors in undergrad was interior design, and I had a robust course load. And I will say it has been a great part of my career. I was fluent in AutoCAD, and that skill has been a really critical part of my career, but also other elements of the interior design profession. So yes, I would co-sign that those are very transferable skills and needed in the historic preservation field.
Thank you. So next we have a question from Shristi, and I know I'm going to get this wrong. I'm so sorry. Tamraker. Would you like to unmute yourself and come on the video and ask your question of the panelists?
Yeah, hi. It was really great to listen to all of your experiences. My question is, so as an international student myself, I wanted to know more about the opportunities that international students have.
Do we have anybody who might want to be able to answer that? Specifically, I think that Shristi is asking about students coming from overseas who might be on an F1 visa or an F1 OPT. Anybody have any thoughts on that? I don't know what the government role would be.
I'm not sure about the career portion of that, but I can say from the nonprofit perspective that I think it would be incredibly helpful for you to connect with any local preservation nonprofit you might have, or if you're close to where the statewide preservation nonprofit is, or even at the national level. But I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other. I know that I'm very interested, and a lot of folks on our board are very interested in learning from other communities, particularly around sea level rise and other sort of global preservation challenges we're facing. So I think maybe just connecting might be a good start.
This is
Great. Yep.
So I can't speak to American Conservation Experience or NICP, the 2 that I've done with the National Park Service, but I know for the Smithsonian, for the Minority Awards Program Fellowship and some of their other fellowships, those are completely open to international students. So if those opportunities seem of interest to you, I would definitely look into that. And I can put the link as well in the chat for Smithsonian.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would say, Shristi, it depends also on what your career goals are within historic preservation, because as we've seen today, there are a myriad of career paths that you can choose, whether you choose to follow the regulatory route, whether you choose to go the nonprofit route, whether you choose to go to, the design route, or, even the advocacy route, or even the legal route. So it really, I guess we would need to know more information to be able to help you.
Yeah, because I've been looking for jobs, and a lot of government jobs require you to be a US citizen. So that has always been like, oh, no, I cannot apply for this job now. So I was just like looking into more and more jobs. So.
But as you can see, there are many other opportunities for you to work in preservation or these related fields that would not be federal jobs. And one of the other, and they're all connected. So you would be working with so many of us. And the other thing that I will just note, and I'm certain for the students that are on this call, you have heard this a million times. There is nothing more important to you than networking. The more people you meet, the more people you walk up and introduce yourself to, you stay in touch with, you go back and ask them to help connect you to other people, that is truly the way you will really build a career. It's not a ladder anymore. It's more like a spider web. You may go sideways, you may go to the other side, and you may move different ways, but that is really critically important. Okay, so Rachel, would you like to come on the screen and ask us your question?
Thank you so much.
And thank you, Shristi.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, well, my question was, because I know someone mentioned that they had an interest in politics and policy, and so I just want to know from your perspective, it doesn't have to be like a career kind of question, but just from your perspective and experience, what impact could a person with that type of background make to the historic preservation field? And what do you think is kind of the best information that they have been able to provide?
Maybe helpful for me to go first, because from the nonprofit sector, we probably do a little more advocating than other roles. And actually, the Florida Trust is doing our legislative day at the Florida Capitol tomorrow. So we have folks from Florida Main Streets and our board and other folks, maybe they're trying to get a Florida Preservation Grant funded. They're going to come join us to actually speak with and advocate directly to their lawmakers. So for nonprofits, I think that's a key part, because we are like we're the voice of our members. So not every member of the Florida Trust is able to go speak to their lawmakers, but we can be their voice for them. So it's a key role for us. And actually, one of our board members is a very experienced legislative consultant here in Tallahassee. And so for us, his experience is invaluable, really. But I think it's a lot of opportunity there.
Thank you so much. So now I'd like to call on Ray Harada, and I will say that he's asking a very open or perhaps she is asking a very open-ended question, and I think that we could spend probably 4 hours answering this question. So we can maybe just give some high-level ideas, and also please know that you are welcome to contact either Lynn Richmond, who set up this webinar, or me personally, and I will be happy to field your questions to the right person if you have follow-up questions, or put them in the chat and we'll try to get back to you. So Ray, are you there to ask a question? Great.
Everybody can hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this opportunity. So I had a master's degree of history preservation 2008. And then, sorry, I forgot her name, but earlier someone said, like, try to get the job here, and then about as an international student. I was an international student. So I went back to my own country and worked for his preservation field for 10 years. And then I moved back to the US because my family's here. I just don't know where to start, honestly. Should I refresh my memory of Section 106 of NEPA, that kind of stuff? I don't know how should I, what kind of career I had the most impact in my resume. A lot of you guys helped me to know the internship programs, fellowships. I don't know, I should apply for internship right now. Any suggestion for like me, not fresh graduate student anymore, but my career is completely not in the US. Just open questions. Thank you very much.
Let's try to keep our answers to this to under 5 minutes, because we do have other questions. I know everybody's going to have a lot to offer.
Well, I guess as an ACHP staffer, I would say it's never a bad idea to refresh your knowledge of Section 106. That's always helpful. Sure. I guess it really depends on what your skill set is and what you've been doing, I guess, for the past couple of years back home. There may be opportunities in the private sector. There may be opportunities for cultural resource management firms and jobs with them. And I know cultural firms are always looking for good folks to do research work, and it just, yeah, there's opportunities out there, I would say.
Thank you.
I'm representing the nonprofit world, so my answer is probably going to be predictable a little bit, but I think, and I've seen with others that this experience actually bears fruit, but you know, just volunteering, getting involved and learning and working hands-on. We had an intern, and I know that may not be the best fit for you, but we had just last summer an intern that was working here that was able to sort of leverage what she learned here into a role that she really, really enjoys. And what's nice for doing that with nonprofits is you get to learn, you get to wear a lot of hats and learn a lot of different things. So you may be doing some regulatory stuff, you might be doing some communication stuff. It's just, I think, and of course I'm very biased, but I think it's a great opportunity to get in the door and learn a lot of different components of historic preservation.
Now, the next question is really very similar. It's from Nikesha. So would you like to ask your question of the panel? And I really think that this is very similar. So we may just want to post some information in the chat for people to look at. Are you there, Nikesha?
Yes, ma'am, I am. So my question was, what advice do you all have for undergraduate students who are looking to find jobs in the near future before the year closes, but are not ready to attend graduate school or not sure what we should get our master's in?
I'm happy to speak to that. So Nikesha, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Greening Youth Foundation. They're one of our external partners for the National Park Service. And usually with ACE or NICP, I think most of those are going to be for graduate students, but for Greening Youth, that is not the case. So I am going to pop that information into the chat for you and anybody else who's interested. But currently they have positions listed at Port Chicago all the way in California. They have some stuff in the DMV area where I'm located, but really it's across the country, and it's giving kind of hands-on internship experience, but paid. So you'd be paid hourly about, I think, $15 an hour, if I remember correctly. So I'll pop that in the chat. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Thank you so much.
I would also add that if you go to any of these organizations, for example, the National Park Service or the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation or the ACHP, one question that you can always be thinking about is, what opportunities does your organization have for me? And so I have two more questions that I really want to ask, but I want to slip one in here. And that is, one thing that has always been so distressing to me is the fact that these fields in general are very traditionally non-diverse. And I have a question about whether people are seeing a difference there. A large part of historic preservation, for example, is archaeology. And I got a recent report from a national archaeology organization stating that less than 1% of archaeologists are people of color. So I guess my question is, can anyone speak to whether we are seeing a difference?
I'll go. I mean, I'm relatively so new. I still think of myself as an emerging professional, and I can only speak to my, I would still say, very limited experience. But I've had colleagues at the National Park Service that were contingent staff. So they were other fellows, interns, or contractors, one of which was in a Black archaeologist. And for years, I watched her grind to get a position with the Park Service, or really anything to use her PhD as an archaeologist. And she's brilliant, but it just didn't work out. And now she works outside of the federal government doing diversity, equity, and inclusion training. So I say this anecdote just to say that I think where we're going to see real changes is people actually hiring folks and investing their time and their resources into building that next generation. So
thank you. That's something we all have to be cognizant about in the future. Beth, did you want to answer?
I was just going to say that I agree with what Porsha said, and we are seeing change, but it's very slow and very incremental. We are undertaking, you know, and it's when you have the discussion about DEIA. I mean, it's something that many of us have thought it needs to be embedded in everything we do, not a special side initiative. But until we can get it embedded into the processes, things won't improve until you're really pushing special initiatives. So we're hiring a cohort of young professionals, 2 of whom are still in school, and I believe it's 3 of them have just graduated. These are architects, all of whom are diverse candidates into the office of the chief architect. The they will not be directly under my purview, but I will look forward to being able to work with them as folks who are in or just coming out of school to also, reveal to them more about career opportunities, just like this webinar has done. We need to be doing this constantly.
Thank you, Beth. So I have 2 more questions, but Melissa, I have another question, and I'm going to ask you for the sake of time to put some notes in the chat about this, because I know you have educational opportunities and workshops and conferences where there are opportunities for people to participate, do workshops, learn more about what you do at the Florida Trust and Preservation. And I would love it if you would put some notes about that in the chat so people could follow up on it if they're interested. So now let me turn back to Sarah. Sarah Johnson, are you there and ready? There you are.
Hello. I'm pretty new to this whole world, realizing that my passion for preserving historical houses and sites is actually a career. It's very exciting to find that out. So I have just been noticing a lot of chatter between, a lot of preservation people I follow, that people who work sort of as freelance architectural historians or preservation specialists, what have you, have a hard time advocating for the value of their work. And they have a hard time knowing what to charge because there's like no set, I don't know, there's not an understanding that this is important work. I feel because it's such a passion career that it may have started as a lot of work getting done for free. And I don't know if that movement has continued in the, as a freelance, in the freelance world. So yeah, I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that, or if you've experienced that, and if there's just not a lot of transparency in people sharing what they charge for their work and that kind of thing.
Any takers on this one?
This is Porsha. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Why don't
mine?
Go ahead, Porsha, and then Raina.
My answer is going to be really brief because this really isn't my wheelhouse, but I feel like I'm familiar with a resource that may be helpful to you. There's a Facebook page, Historic Preservation Professionals. You're probably familiar with that. I think it's such a great resource. It's a really kind community, and not a part of it, definitely join, because I think they could definitely give you an answer to that. Also, Sarah Marsom, hopefully I'm saying their name correctly, also is a really great resource, and they have an unconference every year that I think is really cool that you should definitely look into, and I'm happy to share that information if you think it's helpful.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Raina?
Well, and I think too, there's a lot of discussion about this in the Facebook group that Porsha mentioned, and I think there is, I don't know, I've never been myself a consultant. I've worked over the course of my career with consultants and kind of, as on a contract basis. And I think there is a growing understanding that, people should be paid, a living wage, or be paid what they're worth. And the more that people in the community, ask for that and ask that of people that they're doing business with, hopefully it will result in more people, more companies or people who are doing contract business accepting that as part of that. That's kind of the goal, is that if everyone is starting to acknowledge it's something that hopefully that there will be some change. But I think you are starting to see at least a better acknowledgement of it as something that needs to be addressed. And I think there are some that see there could be potential challenges if people share what they charge with. I know some people say that could be cost fixing, and I don't want to say that's an issue, but I do know some people say that can be a reason not to share it. So just something to keep in mind with that.
Huh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'd like to turn to Jordan Tannenbaum, who also had a question. Jordan, are you still with us? Well, I was afraid we might. Oh, there he is. Great. Hi, Jordan. You're muted.
Unmute. There we go. Good, good. I don't know if you can see me. Hello, Laura. Hi,
We
everybody.
can't see your video, and it would be lovely to, but
Yeah.
feel free to go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, don't know how to make that happen, but so my question is to each one of the speakers, what do you like best about what you do? And don't all answer at the same time.
So let's see who would want to go first. Beth, are you available? And is your Wi-Fi working?
Right now it is.
Great.
And that's a really complicated question, Jordan.
Attending council meetings, no doubt.
Oh, that's at the top. The top.
Of course, of course.
The thing that I love most about my job is a double-edged sword. It is the passion that I have for what I do. And passion can be construed variously by how it is perceived by those you're working with. And so I love to be passionate, and I am very passionate. But what I have been counseled in my career as I have evolved in it in various circumstances is that the passion often it tips a balance on a negative scale. So what I have had to learn in certain circumstances is to counter or temper my passion with what has also been described as, well, you're quite authoritative and you're very credible. And don't undermine that by being too passionate. So you can take that for what it's worth. I will never forgive my passion for what I do. It has sustained me for my entire career. And I have worked at my entire career in preservation. But I have found that it has been quite an education to learn how to present my knowledge and expertise so that it is heard and not dismissed.
Mm-hmm. Great, great.
That's good, Beth.
Wise word.
Thank you. So I think for me in my role, what I probably enjoy the most is the work that I do to empower anyone who is, Beth, to use your phrase, passionate about a historic place in their community to feel empowered that they can do something about it. I feel like sometimes too often in our field, there can feel like a barrier to entry. Like you can't really advocate something because you don't have the right credentials or you don't have the right maybe knowledge base. But my philosophy is that the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation, if there's an historic resource in your community that you care about, your feeling matters as much as anybody else's, and we want to hear from you. And I love that role that I'm able to play here.
Great, great.
Thank you. Porsha, back to you.
Oh, okay, unmuted, perfect. So I would say, honestly, I had a really affirming experience this morning that I wanted to bring up because it's really what makes what I do with the Park Service and with the African American Civil Rights Network really worth it. We provide technical assistance for resources that come onto the network. And one of those resources is the All-Star Bowling Lane in Orangeburg, South Carolina, which was part of what's known as the Orangeburg Massacre. And so there's this really awesome woman who has been protecting and trying to preserve the site named Ellen. And she called me to give me an update on what they've been doing. And she talked about how the former owner's grandson got to visit the bowling lane. And that's really significant because his grandfather barred African Americans from being able to use the bowling lane and really was an impediment to progress. And so she said she took him and his family on the tour, and he burst into tears and talked about what it was like to be at that place and to talked about reconciliation and some other things. And she just said, like, we're doing really good work here. I'm really excited. And like, that's all I needed, because sometimes you get very disillusioned with what you do. And to be a part of that story in a little way with what I do, just like made me feel like the stress of grad school and working really hard was worth it, because that was just felt really good. I'm rambling now. I'm sorry, but it was,
no, it's good.
You never ramble, and we're
Never.
happy to hear from you. So I know we're over time now, but if Raina and Laura would like to just quickly answer that question, I think we're okay.
Well, I'll be brief. I'm in my current role. I've only been here for a few months, and I think one of the things that brings me joy is working with both at the Advisory Council and my liaison agency, the National Park Service, some just really fantastic people who are kind-hearted and really thoughtful and care deeply and sincerely about the work that they do. And being able to work with them on a daily basis and just kind of have like philosophical conversations in like a really nerdy, fun way is just, it can be really enjoyable and fun. So if you enjoy that kind of thing, you'd be in good company. So.
What I love about my job, everything.
Oh, wow.
So
Everything.
Susan, great. Susan, can I just say, give me a minute and then I'll be quiet.
Of course.
Okay, just want to just say two things. Number one, that just to let everybody know that I started as an intern at the Advisory Council way back when. And now I'm on the council, vice chair. So that can happen. And the other is my day job is a CDO, or Chief Development Officer, and we mean development is in fundraising. For those of you who are thinking about nonprofit jobs, every nonprofit needs funding. And there's another way in which you can direct your passion. As Beth said, I agree. I relate so closely to what she said. Your passion can be directed to raising the money that your organization needs. So finally, Susan, thank you. Thank all of you. This was a terrific webinar. Thank you so much. And delighted to attend. Very interesting.
So happy you
Lots of
joined
love.
us, Jordan. So I just want to say I've put my email in the chat for those of you that are still on. I want to thank everyone. I'll follow up on Jordan's thank you. We are so happy to see you all tonight. If you have questions, feel free to email me. My email is in the chat. And I especially want to thank all of our speakers tonight. You guys are awesome. And we appreciate everything each of you are doing for historic preservation.
And thank you for the opportunity to participate.
And on that note, thank you. Please feel free to sign up for one of our next webinars. Take care, everybody. Good night.
Bye. Good night.